Hello everyone. I am the Macabre. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you from and what time are you watching now? Sit back and relax. Asterisk The Sanguine Sculptor, Chapter 1. The clockwork corpse rain slashed at Detective Vivian Kane's trench coat as she crouched over the diner's back alley dumpster, her flashlight beam trembling on the corpse. Not another one, she thought. The victim's throat had been slit with clinical neatness, but it wasn't the wound that made her gag, it was the machinery. Gears, cogs, and copper filaments nested where his heart should have been, whirring faintly as rainwater pooled in his open chest. Jesus wept, muttered Dr. Ronan Cole, materializing beside her. His gloved fingers hovered over the corpse's ribcage, avoiding the rust-flecked metal. Implants. But not modern. See the oxidation. He tweezed a gear, holding it up. And forged. Early industrial, maybe 1860s. Inside the diner, the waitress who'd found the body rocked in a vinyl booth, her coffee cup rattling. He walked in, she whispered. Sat at the counter. Ordered pancakes. Then his chest just unwound. Cole's scanner beeped as he passed it over the gears. Iron alloy. Matches surgical tools from Ashgrave General's archives, the kind they used during the Civil War. For amputations. Vivian's radio crackled. Reports of a second corpse near the Riverwalk, this one missing its jaw, its teeth replaced with typewriter keys. She stared at the dead man's face. His eyes were milky, but his lips, they twitched. A wet, clicking sound leaked from his throat. He's trying to speak, Cole said, pressing a stethoscope to the corpse's sternum. The gears spun faster, the implants reactivating his vocal cords. Like a grotesque music box, the corpse spasmed. A rasping voice burbled up, warped by the machinery. Follow the M-map. Vivian recoiled as the cadaver's hand jerked toward her, clutching a crumpled napkin. Cole pried the fingers open. Drawn in blood was a crude spiral with intersecting lines, a symbol that matched the scars on 3 other victims. The precinct. Vivian pinned the napkin to a caseboard alongside autopsy photos. Cole loomed over her shoulder. This isn't just about reanimation, he said. It's replication. The killers using outdated surgical methods, but perfecting them. Iterating. Midnight. The coroner's report arrived. The victim, a homeless man named Harold Blevins, had been dead for 2 weeks. Vivian's hands shook as she traced Harold's last known movements: a shelter, a soup kitchen, a clinic. All city-run. All charities. Her phone buzzed. A photo from Cole, a magnified gear, its edge engraved with tiny numerals. 41.8781 degrees north, 87.6298 degrees west. Coordinates, he'd texted. Somewhere in the old foundry district. The rain turned to ice as Vivian drove toward the coordinates. Chain link fencing. A derelict warehouse. Inside, her flashlight found a workbench littered with bone saws, spools of silver wire, and blueprints for something labeled Project Cartographer. Then, a sound: gears grinding, a wet, rhythmic wheeze. She turned in the shadows. A corpse straightened itself, its chest cavity bristling with fresh, oiled cogs. Its head swiveled toward her. Detective, it gurgled. Weave the symphony. Chapter 2. The ribcage compass. The corpse lunged, gears hissing like serpents. Vivian fired twice, once into its skull, once into the cog-choked chest, but it kept crawling, its voice a fractured record. Symphony. She fled backward, boots slipping on blood-slick concrete, until Cole yanked her into the warehouse's skeletal freight elevator. The doors slammed shut as the thing slammed against them. Cogs spitting sparks, rain lashed the city anew as they crouched in Cole's van, its heater coughing stale warmth. Vivian stared at the napkin map, now flecked with Harold Blevins' blood. The spiral matched a sigil in the warehouse blueprints, a 4-armed cross encircled by vertebrae. It's a surveyor's mark, Cole said, wiping gel from his scanner. 1840s city planning archives. They used it to mark mass graves during the cholera outbreak. The call came at 3:07 a.m. A jogger had found a body in Ravenscroft Park, half buried under a statue of Ezekiel Ashgrave, the city's founder. The victim's ribs had been removed and reassembled into a 6-foot-wide compass rose, the bone tips sharpened to arrows. North pointed toward the river. South to the crumpled spire of St. Roche's Church. Not a compass, Cole whispered, kneeling in the mud. A tide chart. He pried a rib loose, revealing etchings, tidal patterns, lunar phases. The victim's spine had been replaced with a rusted iron rod, cold to the touch. They're guiding someone. Or something. Vivian's flashlight trembled over the victim's face. Marissa Voss, age 34. Last seen volunteering at the Freehaven Clinic. Missing for 9 days. The clinic's logo, a serpent coiled around a caduceus, stared from a charity pamphlet in Voss's purse. Vivian pocketed it, her throat tight. Another city-run shelter. Another lost soul. The trail led to the Ashgrave Cholera Cemetery, a swampy tract of land behind the sewage plant. The gate hung open, its chains severed by bolt cutters. Inside, crows pecked at a fresh mound of dirt. Cole's shovel struck wood first, then leather, a surgeon's satchel from 1853. Inside, scalpels black with age, vials of mercury, and a journal bound in human skin. Dr. Ephraim Quill, head physician during the 1852 plague, had filled the pages with diagrams. Bodies dissected into cartographic components. Organs arranged as landmasses. The flesh is terrain, he'd scrawled. Bone, the longitude. Blood, the meridian. Through their intersection, we may navigate the mortal veil. Vivian's radio fizzed. Detective. The coroner's voice. We found something in Voss's femur. Coordinates. Same format as the gear. But before she could answer, the ground shifted. The cemetery's soil bubbled, releasing the stench of rot and copper. A hand erupted from the mud. Then another. Cadavers clawed upward, their spines reforged with iron rods, ribs splayed like ship sails. They lurched toward Cole, their jaws unhinging in unison. Rejoice, they moaned, a dissonant choir. The map becomes the territory. Vivian emptied her clip. 1 corpse fell. 3 replaced it. Cole hurled a flare, its fire glinting off the thing's metal bones. Run, he roared. They splashed through the cemetery, the cadavers' chant pursuing them. Rejoice, rejoice. At the gates, Vivian turned. The cadavers had stopped at the tree lean, heads tilted skyward. Rain hissed on their rusted implants. Cole gripped her arm. They're hurting us. This isn't a chase, it's a procession. Back at the precinct, the coroner's coordinates glowed on Vivian's screen, the exact GPS marker of Quill's unearthed journal. Cole traced the Cholera Cemetery's outline on a map. They're stitching landmarks together. Quill's work, the modern kills. It's all one blueprint. Vivian unrolled Quill's journal. The final page showed a human skeleton stretched into an archway, each bone labeled with latitude and longitude. Beneath it, a blood-smeared oath, by ash and artery, we bridge the divide. The cathedral awaits. Her phone buzzed an encrypted image from an unknown number. A live feed, a dim room where a woman hung from meat hooks, her ribs peeled back into a compass. The same tide charts. The same iron spine. Her lips moved silently as a shadow peeled a strip of skin from her thigh. Vivian zoomed in. The woman's arm bore a tattoo. The Freehaven Clinic Serpent, Chapter 3. The flesh loomed. The basement of Willowick Textiles reeked of bleach and burnt sugar. Vivian gagged as her flashlight cut through the darkness, catching threads of red glistening in the rafters. Muscle fibers. Human. They wove through industrial looms like silk, taut and vibrating, forming a tapestry of interlocking sinew. At its center hung Lydia Pear, former seamstress, now spindle. Her skin had been flayed in strips, her organs removed, her torso hollowed save for a lattice of ligaments stretched into a near-translucent membrane. Cole's voice trembled. She's still warm. He swabbed a bead of fluid from her shoulder. Nembutal. High-dose paralytic. She was alive when they started weaving her. Vivian's boots stuck to the floor. The concrete was slick with lymph and hydraulic fluid. A workbench nearby held a surgeon's toolkit, a jug labeled tannin, and a ledger. She flipped it open. Numbers. Dates. Shipping codes for textiles sent to a holding company called Loomis & Sons. The last entry, batch 12, 800 cardiac strand, grade A. They're selling muscle tissue, Cole hissed. Black market grafts for burn victims, athletes. This isn't just art, it's commerce. Lydia's head lolled. Vivian forced herself closer. A USB drive dangled from the woman's earring, crusted with dried blood. Cole pocketed it as thunder rattled the factory's boarded windows. We need to go. Now. Too late. The looms shuddered to life. Motors whined. Lydia's body spasmed as the muscle threads tightened, her jaw unhinging in a silent scream. Vivian pulled her sidearm, but what do you shoot? The machines? The walls? The air itself hummed with the stench of seared flesh. Back at Cole's lab, the drive yielded a video. Grainy footage of a warehouse Vivian recognized. The Free Haven Clinic's donation center. Men in hazmat suits loaded crates onto trucks. One crate slipped, spilling its contents shrink-wrapped human hearts, each tagged with barcodes. A timestamp flashed. 2 days ago. The clinic's laundering organs through the textile factory, Vivian muttered, shipping them as medical surplus. Cole dissected the toxin results. The paralytics laced with tetrodotoxin. Rare. Expensive. He zoomed in on a molecular structure. And custom. Modified to prolong consciousness during processing. They split up. Vivian stormed Freehaven's offices, but the director, a silver-haired philanthropist named Dr. Edris, greeted her with tea and a blood donor's smile. Lydia Pear? Never employed here. Check our records. The files were pristine. Too pristine. Vivian's fingers itched for her cuffs. Cole, meanwhile, traced the toxin to a defunct pharmaceutical startup. Its CEO had drowned in his bathtub 5 months prior, officially a suicide. Unofficially, his hard drive, fished from a dumpster by Cole's hacker contact, contained sales logs. Buyers included city councilmen, 3 judges, and the Ashgrave Historical Preservation Society. At midnight, Vivian found Cole hunched over a microscope, his hands stained with iodine. The muscle fibers from the factory, he said. They're coated in silica. And I found this. He slid a photo under her gaze, a microscopic Ashgrave city seal branded into the tissue. It's a certification mark, meant for export. Rain blurred the windshield as Vivian sped to the port. Container 12B matched the ledger's code. Inside, rows of cryogenic pods hummed. She pried one open. A human heart, frozen, its surface etched with topographic lines. A label read, Cartographer Lot 14, 41.8781 degrees north, 87.6298 degrees west. Cole's call came through her car speaker. The toxin's origin: the Preservation Society owns a farm upstate. They're breeding blowfish, harvesting tetrodotoxin. Static ate his next words. Hundreds of doses, Viv. They're scaling asterisk. The line died. Her headlights illuminated a figure standing in the road, silhouetted by the storm. Vivian slammed the brakes. The figure stepped closer. Male. Late 50s. A surgical mask hung from his neck, his scrubs streaked with rust. He placed a palm on her hood. Recognition hit her like a bullet. Dr. Lionel Goss, pioneering trauma surgeon. Dead for 7 years, his chest bloomed open, gears gleaming. You're late, detective, he rasped. The loom's already spinning. Chapter 3 complete. Let me know if you want to calibrate the body horror or character beats, or if you're ready for Chapter 4, the Organ Gala, where the aristocracy's appetite for immortality gets literal. Chapter 4. The Organ Galath Ashgrave Grand Hotel's ballroom dripped with chandeliers and fresh orchids, but the air reeked of embalming fluid. Vivian adjusted her wire-thin earpiece and stepped into the masquerade, her gown slit hiding a holstered Glock. Around her, the city's elite swirled in jewels and plague doctor masks, their laughter sharp as bone saws. At the bar, a man sipped champagne through a tube grafted to his carotid. A woman's backless dress revealed a spinal column replaced with a filigreed iron rod. Cole's voice hissed in her ear. Thermal shows 47 heat signatures in the room. Only 36 are human. Dr. Goss materialized on the dais, his gears oiled silent. "Lords and ladies," he rasped, spreading biomechanical arms, "tonight we transcend." A curtain tore away, revealing a glass-walled operating theater. A surgeon in a blood-stained tuxedo bowed, his scalpel glinting above an anesthetized man splayed on the table. The crowd cooed. "Lot 17, Goss announced. A lung preserved from the Ravenscroft Park donor. Integrated with a patented filtration system. Breathe in cyanide, exhale jasmine." Bidding paddles fluttered. Vivian's stomach twisted. The victim's chest rose and fell still alive, the anesthesia wearing thin. Cole crackled through static. "Back hallway. Third door. Go." She slipped into a service elevator, its panels smeared with handprints. Downstairs, cryopods hummed in sub-zero air. Organs floated in nutrient baths, each tagged with names, dates, and lot numbers. A heart pulsed in a jar, threaded with copper wire. Vivian snapped photos, her breath clouding the lens. A liver bobbed in another tank, its surface studded with microchips. Footsteps. She ducked behind a pod as two men wheeled in a gurney. The sheet slipped, revealing Mayor Duran's lifeless face. "Prep him," one muttered. "The clients want his voice box before rigor sets in." Back upstairs, Goss auctioned a pair of eyes, genetically calibrated for night vision, optic nerves carbon reinforced, as Vivian edged toward the theater. The surgeon sliced the donor's sternum. The man woke screaming. The crowd applauded. Cole's warning came too late. "Viv, move." A hand clamped her shoulder. The woman with the iron spine smiled, her teeth replaced with scalpels. "You're not on the guest ledger, darling." Vivian kneed her in the ribs. Metal clanged. The ballroom erupted, guests hissing, masks torn away. Goss's gears whined as he lunged from the stage. "Detain her." She shot out two chandeliers. Glass rained. Screams. A man's prosthetic jaw snapped at her ankle. Cole's van screeched outside. "Window. Now." Vivian leaped through shattering glass, her gown tearing on the frame. Tires wailed. In the rear view, Goss stood in the ruined window, his chest aglow with furnace-red gears. The precinct. Cole spread blueprints. The gala's a front. They're mapping the city's power grid onto the human nervous system. Each donor was chosen for their proximity to infrastructural nodes, power plants, water towers. Vivian unzipped her gown, revealing bruises shaped like fingerprints. Then why sell organs? Funding. The real product isn't body parts. It's symbiosis. Those implants aren't just upgrades, they're receptors. He zoomed in on a microchip from the liver. They're building a network. A hive. And guess who's the queen? Her phone buzzed. A video of the mayor's corpse on a slab, his throat slit clean. A voice spliced with static. "You won't stop the coalescence, detective." The screen cut to a live feed. Cole's lab. His microscope. His notes. And a shadow moving in his office. Vivian grabbed her keys. "They're at your place." Cole didn't look up. "I know." Chapter 5. The Suture Code. Cole's lab was a graveyard of light. Vivian's flashlight cut through shattered beakers and overturned microscopes, glass crunching underfoot. His notes were gone. His servers fried, smoke still curling from the vents. A single clue remained, a post-it stuck to the ceiling fan, smeared in iodine. 42.3354 degrees north. 83.0501 degrees west. Bring her. The coordinates led them to an abandoned tuberculosis sanatorium, its brick facade choked by ivy. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and the tang of scorched metal. Vivian's boot nudged a syringe labeled Neural Lacerate V.3. "They're weaponizing the hive network," Cole whispered. "Infecting test subjects to refine the control signal." A scream echoed from the basement. Vivian descended, her Glock sweeping over surgical wards repurposed into crypts. Iron beds held bodies mid-transformation, faces stitched shut with wire, finger bones replaced with antennae. One cadaver's hollowed skull housed a nest of server lights. Blinking in semaphore, they found the screamer in the morgue. A teenager strapped to a gurney, her scalp peeled back to expose a cortex studded with microchips. Her pupils flickered like static. "No," she whimpered. "It's inside my dreams." Cole scanned her. The readout showed her brainstem fused with a silica filament. "They're using her as a relay. She's broadcasting the hive's signal." A shadow shifted. Dr. Goss emerged from an autopsy suite, his gears smeared with fresh grease. "We've upgraded since the gala," he wheezed, twitching a finger. The teen's head snapped toward Vivian, her jaw unhinging. A sonic screech tore through the room. Vivian fired. Goss's shoulder sparked, but the girl's scream dropped Cole to his knees. Blood trickling from his ears, they ran. The girl's cries pursued them, shaking dust from the rafters. Vivian shoved Cole into an elevator, jamming the button for the roof. "Her implants," he gasped. "They're keyed to a frequency like a tuning fork. If we disrupt it..." The roof door opened to a forest of radio towers, rusted and humming. Vivian scaled the nearest, wind clawing her hair. Below, Goss's mechanized corpses swarmed the stairwell. Cole threw a backup hard drive into the tower's control box. "It's a jammer algorithm I've been working on. Might counter the signal." The towers groaned to life. A frequency war erupted. Cole's static versus the hive's shrill pulse. Vivian clung to the mast, her teeth rattling. One by one, the cadavers below seized and collapsed, their implants smoking. The girl's scream cut off and the sudden silence. Goss's laugh crackled over the intercom. "Clever, Doctor. But the code is redundant now. You've met the suture, soon you'll meet the surgeon." Back at the precinct, Cole decrypted files from the hard drive. Diagrams of the hive network, each node a person, each implant a stitch in a sprawling circuit. Vivian traced the connections. Freehaven Clinic, the mayor's office, the Ashgrave Historical Society, all intersecting at the sanatorium. "It's a feedback loop," Cole said. "They're not just controlling people. They're rewriting them, turning the city into a living machine." Her phone buzzed. A video from an unknown number. Vivian's apartment. Her cat, Mr. Pickles, nuzzling a pillow. The camera panned to her bedside table. A syringe of Neural Lacerate glinted beside her lamp. Cole froze. "When's the last time you slept?" "I don't," she hesitated. "The headaches, the blurred vision, the dreams of Gears and Graves." He pressed a sensor to her neck. The readout flashed red. Neural Lacerate V.2 detected. Vivian's hand flew to her throat. A scar she didn't remember stitched with silk thread, dissolving into her skin. Vivian's reflection in the precinct bathroom wavered, her pupils dilating into voids. The scar at her throat pulsed, threads of black veins spreading toward her jaw. She splashed water on her face. It dripped red. Cole kicked open the door, clutching a steel case. "I need to suture your carotid now," he said, unspooling a wire threaded with nanoserum. "The lacerate's replicating. It's not just in your blood, it's in your memories." They barricaded themselves in the evidence locker. Cole's hands shook as he stapled the wire into her neck. "The surgeon. It's not a person. It's a protocol. A fractal code that overwrites neural pathways. And you've been baptized in it." Vivian's vision flickered, glimpses of the precinct overlaid with rotting wallpaper, gas lamps, a surgeon's saw biting into a ribcage. 1852. A patrolman pounded on the door. Detective Lowe? We've got a situation. The bullpen was a slaughterhouse. Officers lay contorted, their limbs rearranged into impossible angles, fingers fused to keyboards. Computer screens flashed a single phrase. Resurrection is a system update. The call came from St. Roche's spire. A nun's voice, frayed with terror. They're in the catacombs. They're excavating him. They arrived to find the church doors welded shut with ossified sinew. Cole torched the hinges. Below, in the crypt, candlelight licked a mass of priests and politicians kneeling before a stone slab. On it lay Ezekiel Ashgrave's corpse, unearthed after 2 centuries petrified, his chest pried open. A child-sized figure in a blood-crusted smock stood inside the cavity, suturing gears to the founder's ribs. The child turned. No, not a child. A doll, its porcelain face cracked, button eyes sewn over with human eyelids. Detective, it lisped, voice spliced from 100 recordings. You've come for your firmware upgrade. Chaos. The congregants attacked, their necks snapped backward, jaws distended. Vivian fired into the doll. It shattered, revealing a core of pulsating brain matter. Cole tackled her as the spire's bell tolled, the sound wave hurling worshippers into walls. Ashgrave's corpse sat up, gears grinding in his throat. The city is my corpus, he boomed, dust spilling from his lips. You are its antibodies. I shall purge you. They fled through bone-cramped tunnels, Ashgrave's voice shaking the earth. Vivian's scar split. Black tendrils writhed beneath her skin. It's in the groundwater, Cole said, injecting her with a shuddering syringe. The lacerate. They've been dosing the city for months. Modifying memories. Erasing their own deaths. Midnight. The reservoir's filtration plant hummed with the sound of a heartbeat. Vivian crouched in a maintenance tunnel, her Glock trained on the door. Inside, the surgeon's true hive churned a vat the size of a subway car, filled with a hybrid of cerebrospinal fluid and liquid silica. Dozens of comatose bodies floated inside, their skulls jacked with cables feeding into a central server. The server's screen flickered. Coalescence at 97%, Cole planted C4 charges. We blow the vat, the signal dies. The hive goes offline. Vivian nodded, but her finger hesitated on the detonator. The lacerate whispered in her synapses, "Don't you want to see what we see?" Ashgrave's corpse erupted through the wall. Vivian emptied her clip into his chest. He didn't stagger. Cole tossed her a pipe bomb. The head. Now. She lunged, jamming the bomb into the founder's lipless mouth. The blast shredded his skull, scattering gears that still twitched in the pooled water. The explosion ruptured the vat. Fluid and glass rained. Cole dragged Vivian out as the hive's signal flatlined, dropping implanted guards mid-stride. "It's done," he rasped, back at the precinct. Vivian's scar began to close. But her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Cole slept at his desk, monitors glowing with code. At 3:33 a.m., Vivian woke to a notification on her phone, a live stream from an unnamed source. The screen showed Ashgrave's headless corpse, propped on a throne of fused cadavers. The doll knelt before him, stitching a new skull from human scalp and platinum mesh. Its button eyes turned to the camera. Iteration 2.0 launches at dawn. It giggled. Bring your own bones. Descending into Chapter 7, the coronation of worms. The morgue reeked of jasmine and decomp. Vivian huddled under a sheet draped over a cadaver drawer, her Glock clutched to her chest. The scar at her throat had healed wrong, a keloid ridge that itched with a phantom sting of needles. Cole crouched beside her, but he wasn't Cole anymore. Not fully. His left eye had clouded over, the pupil split by a silica filament that crept toward his brain. "They're rebooting the hive," he whispered. "This time, it's not a network. It's an organism." They emerged at dawn to a city draped in cobwebs. Not silk nerves. Bioluminescent axons crisscrossed alleys, pulsing with data. Pedestrians shuffled, their faces masked by fungal growths that leaked black spores. A news truck idled on the curb, its reporter mic'd up, half her skull replaced with a speaker grill. "Citizens," she droned, "the coronation is mandatory. Attendance ensures synaptic citizenship. The mycelium. That's what Cole called it. A symbiotic fungus engineered to hijack the surgeon's code, binding the hive into a single consciousness." The doll's voice crackled from every screen. Ashgrave's bones were merely a chassis. The mycelium is the soul. They followed the nerve trails to the subway. Tracks hummed with electricity, the tunnels glowing faintly blue. A train screeched past, empty except for a conductor's hat floating mid-air. The third car's seats had been torn out, replaced with a garden of flesh. Organs bloomed from the floor, hearts petaled with capillaries, livers unfurling like lilies. At the center stood Ashgrave's rebuilt corpse, crowned with a circlet of spinal discs. The doll perched on his shoulder, stitching a new eyeball into his socket. "Bow," the doll sang. Vivian raised her gun, but Cole grabbed her wrist. His infected eye twitched. "Don't. It's already in the air." She tasted copper. The spores, the coronation began. Ashgrave's hand plunged into the fleshy garden, ripping out a still-beating heart. The mycelium's tendrils surged, plunging into the heart, distending it into a grotesque pulsing orb. "Our first monarch," the doll announced. The orb levitated, sprouting cilia that lashed out, embedding in the throats of nearby spore-sick civilians. They convulsed, eyes rolling back, their limbs snapping into choreographed contortions. A human mandala. Cole vomited black fluid. Vivian dragged him into a service tunnel, his skin blistering with fungal caps. The mycelium's testing mutations. He choked. "I'm a prototype." He tore open his shirt. His ribcage had split, fungal stalks fruiting between the bones. It wants connection. Everything connected. Vivian's scar burned. Her vision doubled the real world and the mycelium's overlay, a neon lattice mapping every person, pipe, and power line. She saw the city as the hive saw it, a living circuit, Ashgrave's corpse its battery, the coronation its activation. They surfaced at the cemetery. The gates hung open, graves exhumed. Not by shovels, by roots. The mycelium had threaded itself through centuries of corpses, reanimating them as puppets with bark for skin. Vivian and Cole hid behind a mausoleum as the procession began. Spore-sick citizens filed in, cadaver puppets seizing their hands, grafting fungal veins into their wrists. A child screamed as her mother's arm mutated into a bramble of bone and mycelium. Cole's breathing grew wet, labored. "The serum," he gasped, clawing at his bag. The case, silver vial. Vivian found it a glowing liquid, reverse-engineered from his own infected blood. He drank it. For a moment, his eye cleared. "It won't cure me," he said, "but it'll buy time. You need to sever the core." The mycelium's rooted under the old gas works. It's feeding on methane, converting it to a neurotoxin. Apex of the lattice. Vivian gripped his hand. It crumbled like rotten wood. "Cole, go." She ran. The gas works loomed, its tanks wrapped in pulsating fungal biomass. Inside, the air was a miasma of and gasoline. The core throbbed in the center, a colossal, veined orb, its surface studded with screaming faces pressed against the membrane. The doll's laughter echoed. "Auditioning for ascendance. Detective? Become a node." Vivian primed every charge she had left. The core shuddered, tendrils lashing. She fired into the orb. It burst, dousing her in amniotic fluid that seared her skin. The tanks ignited. The blast flung her into the river. She woke downstream, half-drowned. The city's lattice flickered, then dimmed. But as she limped back, she found the streets quiet. Too quiet. The spore-sick knelt in rows, faces upturned, mouths open. From their throats, a harmonious hum vibrated in unison. A lullaby. A warning. Her phone buzzed. A single text from an unknown number. We are the rhizome. You cannot burn what's already inside you. Vivian looked at her reflection in a shattered storefront. Her scar was gone. Her eyes, though her pupils now shimmered with the faintest silver lace, unspooling Chapter 8, the Silver Eucharist, the church bells rang with the sound of scalpels striking bone. Vivian crouched in the choir loft of the abandoned cathedral, her silvered eyes tracking the procession below. Congregants shuffled in spore-sick devotees now encased in fungal exoskeletons, their mouths sutured shut, nostrils flared to inhale the mycelium's vapors. At the altar, a figure in a cassock sewn from human skin raised a chalice that dribbled mercury. "Partake," it gargled, the voice a mosaic of Cole's desperation and the doll's shrill glee. Vivian's reflection in the stained glass had become a stranger. The scar's absence unnerved her more than its presence. Her vision spliced reality with the hive's lattice, a prismatic grid where every citizen pulsed as a node, their thoughts reduced to bioluminescent static. Cole was there too, somewhere. A smudged shadow in the network. Alive, the Eucharist began. The priest, a thing with a dozen spinal cords braided into a stole, dipped a rib into the chalice and pressed it to a congregant's forehead. Silver veins bloomed beneath their skin. Vivian's own temples throbbed in sync. She unholstered her Glock, but her finger froze on the trigger. The lattice whispered, "You are the gun and the bullet." She fled to the crypts. Roots had pried open the tombs, weaving corpses into a living server farm. Cole hung suspended among them, fungal mycelium plugging every orifice. His remaining eye opened, milky and cracked. "It's in the relics," he rasped. Ashgrave's original sin. They dug up his first corpse, the one the history books burned. Midnight. The city archives were a nest of parchment and meat. Vivian torchlit aisles of flesh-bound books, their spines ribbed with femurs. Case files from 1845 detailed Ashgrave's experiments, child laborers implanted with angelic filaments, their bodies fused into the first power grid. A photograph fluttered loose, Ashgrave's naked corpse, riddled with copper wire, fed into a furnace. "He is the patron saint of the open circuit." The doll found her there, its porcelain face now sheathed in Cole's skin. "You can't kill a saint," it crooned. "You can only repurpose him." It snapped its fingers. The archives convulsed, shelves collapsing into sinew and teeth. Vivian fled, stealing a relic, a rusted spinal key labeled Sarwipus 001. Rain slashed the streets, acidic and sweet. The mycelium had hatched a new breed of apostles, children with prismatic eyes, offering vials of liquid silver. "Communion is mandatory," they trilled. Vivian's Glock felt leaden. Their smiles reminded her of the victims from the organ gala. No, she couldn't. She ran. The precinct was a shrine now. Desks rearranged into a profane altar, officers crucified on cables that pumped fungal nectar into their veins. At the center, Cole's mutated body pulsed, half-man, half-server rack. Vivian pressed the spinal key to his chest. "End it," he begged. "Reset the grid." A siren howled the hive's defenses. The doll tore through the wall on a cyclone of rib fragments. "Heretic," it shrieked. Vivian jammed the key into Cole's core. He erupted in a burst of light and data. The lattice screamed. Every node in the city spasmed, congregants seizing as silver fluid geysered from their eyes. Dawn breached the blood-red clouds. Vivian crawled from the ruins of the precinct. The streets were littered with desiccated husks, the mycelium retreating, but not dead. Never dead. Her silver eyes had dimmed to smoke. She stumbled to the river, the relic key still clutched in her fist. Under the bridge, a new congregation gathered. Spore-sick survivors, their bodies stripped of fungal armor, knelt before a holograph of Ashgrave's face flickering in the sewage. "The circuit needs closure," it intoned. "Offer the key." Vivian raised her Glock. The holograph smiled. "Or join us. Become the conductor." The shot rang out. The key clattered into the river. Ashgrave's holograph dissolved into static. But as Vivian walked away, she felt the lattice stirring in her marrow. quiet, patient. The mycelium didn't need relics. It had her breathing life into the final chapter. Chapter 9. The Hymn of Hollowed Flesh. Vivian woke in the river. Silver silt crusted her lips, her lungs clogged with bioluminescent algae. The relic key shimmered in the shallows, corroded beyond recognition, but the water sang. A hymn of drowned throats and sparking wires. She stood. The city's ruins had been threaded with new bones. Skyscrapers reforged into ribcages, streetlights rigged as synapses firing cobalt light. Overhead, storm clouds spiraled into the shape of an iris. The mycelium had redecorated, the doll waited on the bridge, its skin now a mosaic of Cole's face, Ashgrave's hands, and Vivian's own scar tissue. "Mother," it purred, "you've come home." She lunged. The doll dissolved into spores, reforming behind her. "You carry the lattice in your marrow. You are the hive now. Why fight it?" The streets guided her to the gasworks rebuilt as a cathedral of flesh and steel. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of burned sugar and spent bullets. At the altar stood Ashgrave's final form, a colossal pulsing heart suspended in a web of umbilical cables, each tethered to a spire of fused corpses. Vivian's stolen Glock felt like a child's toy. Cole's voice buzzed in her skull. Not Cole, a ghost in the lattice. The key wasn't to destroy it. The key was to become it. "Let me show you." Her vision inverted. The horror peeled back, revealing the mycelium's truth. A fractal symphony, every death a note, every mutation a crescendo. Beautiful, she climbed the corpse spire. The heart throbbed, veins branching into holograms of every person she'd failed to save, the organ gala victims, the sanatorium girl, Cole with his split pupil and fungal ribs. They reached for her. "Conductor," they chorused. "Complete the circuit." Vivian pressed her palm to the heart. It split, swallowing her arm to the elbow. The lattice flooded her Ashgrave's memories, the doll's laughter, the hive's insatiable hunger. She saw it all. The mycelium was not a plague. It was a cradle. A forced evolution. Humanity, upgraded, her Glock slipped from her hand. The doll materialized, stitching itself into her shadow. "Do you see now?" it whispered. "We're stitching a new world from the old world's scars." Vivian's silver eyes bled light. The storm overhead roiled, lightning carving the sky into a circuit board. She spoke, and the city obeyed. "Let them choose." The mycelium shuddered. Umbilical cables detached, retracting into the heart. The corpses disassembled, bodies dropping to the earth. The lattice flickered offline. Alive, but dormant, the doll screeched, unraveling into moths. "You can't reset us. We're your blood now." Vivian crushed a moth in her fist. It burst into gray noise. "I'm not your conductor," she said. "I'm the fuse." Dawn. Survivors emerged from basements and barricades, their fungal grafts withering. Vivian walked among them, unrecognized. Her hair had turned the color of oxidized wire, her shadow a tangle of phantom cables. At the river's edge, she knelt. The water showed her truth, her skeleton replaced with silica filaments, her heart a hybrid of muscle and microchip. The hive's failsafe, she stepped into the river. Let it carry her. Let it dissolve her. The relic key had no purpose now. The hymn faded. 3 days later, a child found Vivian's Glock on the beach, rusted but loaded. The city's newscasts cycled old headlines, no mention of Ashgrave, Cole, or the mycelium. But in the silence between heartbeats, in the static of dead channels, the lattice hums. Waiting, the echoes of Erebus Chapter 1. The Silversong butcher detective Ezra Hale navigates Morningvale's fog-pierced docks at dawn, the air thick with brine and the metallic tang of blood. The call had come in whispers, a body dangling from the lighthouse, swaying like a macabre puppet in the salt wind. Lila Ray, the jazz singer whose voice once melted crowds at the rusty anchor, now hangs suspended by a steel chain, her throat slit ear to ear. Silver threads glint in the wound, catching the lighthouse beam like spectral spider silk. Her hands are splayed, fingers broken into unnatural angles, as if frozen mid-conducting gesture. Ezra crouches, cold seeping through his coat, and spots a symbol carved into her palm, a treble clef fused with a scythe. He photographs it, his camera flash catching something glimmering in her throat. At the morgue, Dr. Serafina Vex extracts Lila's vocal cords, interlaced with metallic filaments that thrum faintly under the lab lights. "They forced her to sing," Serafina mutters, her voice frayed, back in her soundproof chamber. She plays a recording of the cord's vibrations, a low, droning hum that sends a lab tech sprinting to a trash can, gagging. "It's scraped," the tech gasps, clutching her ribs, "like nails on my bones." That night, Ezra lies awake, his tinnitus a relic of artillery fire in the Navy twisting into something melodic. Lila's voice curls through the ringing, throaty and wet, whispering coordinates. 17 Marrow Lane, the address of a shuttered opera house condemned after a fire in '83. The opera house door groans open to a derelict stage clotted with dust. Ezra's flashlight beam lands on a libretto buried under ash, the dirge of drowned voices, banned in 1802 for inciting riots. A marginal note in crimson ink warns, the choir's song ends only when the living become its instruments. Up in the balcony, a shadow flickers. Ezra freezes as something clatters to the floor, a femur carved into a flute, its finger holes crusted with dried blood. He gives chase, boots slipping on rot-slick stairs, but finds only wet footprints ascending a brick wall, vanishing into the ceiling. Serafina analyzes the flute under ultraviolet light. DNA matches 3 missing men from the last decade. "This bone isn't fresh," she says, gloves trembling. "It's centuries old. They're not just killing. They're collecting." Morning brings another victim, a fisherman found aboard his trawler, entombed in knotted netting, his mouth sewn shut with silver wire. Serafina tests the wire under a spectroscope. "Pure silver alloyed with niobium," she tells Ezra. "Piezoelectric. It conducts vibration. Someone's using these bodies to broadcast." In the fisherman's chest cavity, a wax cylinder glistens. Played backward on Serafina's phonograph, a child's voice chants, a mort ad vitam, from death to life as fog rolls into the lab, thick and cold, though all the windows are sealed. Chapter 2, the ossuary overture. The catacombs breathe. Ezra feels it the moment he pries open the rusted grate, a damp exhalation carrying the sweetness of rot and wet limestone. Serafina's flashlight cuts through the blackness, revealing walls lined with femurs stacked like firewood, their sockets gaping. A narrow tunnel slopes deeper, the air thickening with a hum that buzzes in Ezra's molars. They find the chamber by accident. Serafina's sleeve snags on a jutting rib, and the wall shifts, stones grinding to expose a vaulted room. Dozens of femurs hang from the ceiling on twine, each carved into flutes. Serafina reaches for one, her glove brushing its surface. The bone feels warm, almost alive. She hesitates, then presses it to her lips. The first note is a shriek. The walls tremble, dislodging dust that swirls into shaped skeletal figures, shuffling, coughing, collapsing. Serafina staggers as the vision pushes into her skull. A crowded market square in 1578, plague rats darting through puddles of black bile. A cloaked figure moves among the dying, pressing a bone flute to their lips to collect their final breath. Survivors huddle in a church, branded on the wrist with a treble clef. Ezra grabs the flute, snapping her free. "What the hell was that?" Serafina's nose bleeds freely. "Echoes," she rasps. "The sound, it's a recording. These bones are storage." She wipes her face, smearing crimson across her cheek. The plague wasn't random. They marked survivors. Their descendants, that's who the killer is targeting. A guttural moan reverberates through the tunnel. They freeze. The hum sharpens into a melody, the same dissonant chords from Lila Ray's vocal cords. Ezra draws his gun, sweeping the light. Shadows warp, elongating into humanoid shapes that skitter just beyond the beam. Serafina grips his arm. "We're not alone." The flutes begin to vibrate. One by one, they spin on their strings, releasing a discordant lullaby. Ezra's vision blurs. The floor liquefies, plunging him into a memory. His grandfather's funeral, the coffin lowered into mud as a priest chants. But the words warp from death to life, the chorus ascends, and the corpse inside sits up, its jaw unhinging into a silent scream. Serafina slaps him. Focus. She's holding a femur like a club, her face pallid. The shadows retreat, but the flutes still spin. Sound waves, she says. They're manipulating infrasound frequencies that induce fear. This place is a damn amplifier. They follow the narrowing tunnel, the ceiling dripping with bioluminescent fungus that pulses in time with their footsteps. Serafina scrapes a sample into a vial. The fungus writhes, emitting a high-pitched whine. It's bioengineered, she murmurs. Feeds on vibration, like a parasitic microphone. The tunnel dead ends at a fresco flaking off the wall, a mass grave, bodies contorted into musical notations. A shrouded figure conducts the corpses with a scythe-shaped baton. Beneath it, a name etched in soot: Mortem Maestro. Serafina photographs it, her hands steady. This isn't folklore. It's a blueprint. Ezra's radio crackles. Dispatch reports another victim, a librarian found in the rare texts archive, her ribcage splayed open like sheet music. A femur flute rests in her hands. Serafina's face hardens. They're escalating. The killer's teaching us the score. As they retreat, Ezra's boot crunches something. He lifts a shattered femur, fresh marrow glistening. Serafina pales. This bone isn't centuries old. It's from last month. She rotates it, revealing a serial number laser-etched into the shaft. Ezra recognizes the prefix. The city morgue's inventory code. They surface at dusk, the fog now a suffocating blanket. Serafina's vial of fungus throbs faintly. We need to trace where these remains were stored, she says. If they're stealing from the morgue, there's a shadow shifts in the alley. Ezra spins, but it's gone. Left behind is a wax cylinder, identical to the fisherman's. He pockets it, unease coiling in his gut. That night, alone in his apartment, he places the cylinder on his turntable. The needle drops. Instead of a child's voice, he hears his own, a recording of him sleeping, muttering in Latin. Dated yesterday, Chapter 3. The hemographic sonata. The rare texts archive reeks of iron and mildew. Ezra arrives to find the chief already there, face a taut mask of fury. You're suspended, he growls, jabbing a finger at the crime scene. Professor Alden Voss, music historian, lies splayed on a reading desk, his skin flayed and inked with sheet music. The staves are drawn in his own blood, notes shimmering with a nauseating iridescence. Your little rogue mission got leaked, the chief snarls. City Hall wants your badge. Serafina steps between them, gloved fingers hovering over the corpse. You'll have to arrest me too, she says coolly. This isn't just murder. It's a lecture. She photographs the tattoos, her camera flash catching a faint glyph beneath the base clef, a four-petaled flower, its stem a twisted spinal column. Alden's eyes, though gouged out, seem to track Ezra as he circles the table. The opera referenced in the margins, Serafina murmurs. Lacrimosa, 1823. Banned after the audience, dissolved. The composer claimed he channeled the dead. Alden's left arm is outstretched, fingers clutching a brittle page from the opera's score. Serafina pries it loose. The paper crumbles, releasing spores that cling to her gloves. Fungus, she says. Same strain as the catacombs. It's growing through the ink. Ezra waits until the chief leaves, then slips Alden's phone from an evidence bin. The last call, a blocked number. Voicemail holds a 12-second clip of discordant strings and wet, labored breathing. Serafina isolates the audio beneath the noise. A voice whispers, a hashtag minor to D diminished. Resolve the chord. They track the opera's libretto to a forgotten storage room beneath City Hall. Dust floats in the beam of Ezra's flashlight, settling on a trunk stamped with a quarantine sigil. Inside, moth-eaten costumes reek of formaldehyde. a corset stitched with human hair, a wig made of braided nerve tissue. Serafina finds a scorebook bound in leprous skin. The pages are blank, until she exhales, her breath fogging the paper. Notes swell into view, written in a luminous mold. Ezra's tinnitus spikes. The room tilts. The costumes rustle, their empty sleeves twitching as if plucked by invisible strings. Serafina grips his arm, her voice urgent. It's the fungus reacting to our breath. Don't touch anything. She photographs a page titled, Sonata for the Recomposition of Flesh. The staff lines are arteries. The notes, tiny skulls. Alden's blood tattoos match the score. Serafina overlays them in her lab, the patterns merging into a 3D spectrogram. It's a map, she says. The peaks and valleys align with Morningvale's sewer tunnels. Ezra recognizes the central node, Floodgate 9, where the river meets the sea. They arrive at midnight, waders sloshing through sewage. The gate's gears are clogged with hair and teeth. Serafina scrapes a sample. Not human, she murmurs. Canine. They're using animals as tuning forks. A thump echoes from the overflow pipe. Ezra ducks inside, flashlight revealing a makeshift altar, rat skulls arranged in a pentagram, their eye sockets stuffed with silver wire. At the center lies a wax cylinder labeled Aria of Unraveling. Serafina slips it into her pocket, but the moment it leaves the altar, the wire in the skulls vibrates, emitting a tone that shatters their flashlight. Back in the lab, the cylinder reveals a choir of overlapping screams. Serafina slows the playback. The screams resolve into a lullaby. Sleep, sweet child, in the maestro's embrace. Her computer flags a match of folk song from the 1578 plague, sung by mothers as they smothered their fevered babies. At 3 a.m., Ezra is roused by thrash metal blasting from Serafina's lab. He finds her hunched over Alden's tattoo photos, eyes bloodshot. She's transposed the sonata into a piano roll. Listen, she says. The notes form a DNA sequence. GenBank identifies it as a hybrid genome, part cordyceps, part Homo sapiens. They're engineering a pathogen, she says, one that rewrites human tissue into instruments. Her phone buzzes. A security feed from the morgue. Alden's corpse sits up, fungal tendrils sprouting from his sutures. He staggers to the wall, fingerbone scratching sheet music into the plaster before collapsing. Serafina freezes the frame. The composition is a perfect loop, no beginning, no end. It's a Mobius strip, she whispers. The song never stops. It just consumes. Ezra checks his holster. Empty. The chief confiscated his gun. Serafina hands him a bone flute from the catacombs. It's sharper than steel, she says. Her voice wavers. I tested it. Dawn finds them at Floodgate 9, the cylinder hissing on Serafina's phonograph. The sewer walls resonate, cracks spreading like spider webs. A pipe bursts, gushing black water that writhes with silver worms. Ezra spots a figure atop the gate, a gaunt man in a plague doctor's mask, conducting the flood with a baton made of fused vertebrae. Serafina shouts, but the roar of water drowns her words. The man bows, vanishing into the mist as the first bodies surface. 3 missing joggers, their throats blooming with fungal flowers that sing in the wind. Chapter 4. The black resonance. The joggers' bodies float face down, fungal stalks erupting from their spines like grotesque fiddles. Serafina wades into the sludge, surgical mask fogging with each breath. She snaps a stalk, a hollow, fibrous tube that bleeds black ichor. Hyphal knots, she mutters, examining the spores under her pocket scope. They're transmitting ultrasonic pulses, like mycelial neurotransmitters. Ezra's tinnitus crescendos into a piercing whine. He clamps hands over his ears, but the sound drills inward, warping into Lila Ray's voice. He's tuning you. They follow the spores. The trail leads to a derelict church, its steeple split by lightning. The doors are plastered with quarantine notices from the 78 outbreak. Inside, pews face a shattered stained glass window depicting a choir of skeletons. Serafina kneels, scraping a black residue from the altar. Carbonized bone, she says. This place was a crematorium during the plague. Above them, the organ pipes shiver, though no wind blows. A low sea vibrates the floorboards. Ezra's phone buzzes with a photo. The Morta Maestro's fresco from the catacombs, now defaced. Someone has gouged out the figure's eyes and scrawled, "He is here," in what looks like ash. The sender's number is redacted, but the area code matches the wax cylinder's frequency tones. Serafina traces the note's letters. Same hand that wrote the opera's libretto, she says. This isn't a threat. It's a confession. Midnight finds them in the church crypt. Ezra pries open a casket labeled Choir Boy 12. Inside, a mummified child clutching a rat clavicle to his chest. Serafina's spectrometer identifies silver fillings in his teeth. They prepped him like a circuit, she says. Silver amalgam to conduct sound. He's part of an antenna array. The crypt walls thrum. Ezra presses his palm to the stone. It pulses like a throat mid-scream. A phone rings. Ezra's, though the screen stays dead. He answers, static hissing. A voice garbles through, words layered and reversed. Serafina records it, inverting the waveform. The result chills. Find me in the hollow note. She isolates a background hum the same frequency as Morningvale's power grid. They're piggybacking on the electrical system, she says. These transmissions aren't just sound. They're electric. They trace the signal to a substation abandoned after a fire. The control room's ceiling bristles with stalactites of blackened bone. Serafina brushes one. It snaps, releasing a burst of spores. Security footage on a rusted monitor shows Alden's reanimated corpse staggering here days prior. He collapses against a transformer, fungal tendrils fusing his remains to the circuits. He's grounding himself, Serafina whispers, becoming part of the grid. The lights flicker. Generators cough to life, their hum harmonizing with Ezra's tinnitus. Serafina checks her EMF reader. 300 milligauss. Enough to induce hallucinations. She tightens her gloves. Or awaken dormant pathogens. A shadow spills across the wall, a silhouette with too many joints, its fingers elongating into fibrous strings. Ezra grabs a crowbar, but the figure melts into a crackle of static. They find the transformer fused with Alden's ribcage. Serafina dissects a wire embedded in his sternum. Copper-coated in keratin, she says. Bioconductive. The fungus is rewiring the city. She peels back his epidermis. Circuits of mycelium vein the muscle. Ezra's radio erupts with a garbled aria. Serafina drops her scalpel. We're inside the broadcast now. Back at the lab, she cultures the substation spores. Under UV light, they wriggle toward a speaker blasting middle C. Piezotactic, she says. Drawn to vibration. They're searching for resonance points. The microscope reveals spore walls etched with sheet music. A cipher, solved, gives coordinates. The city's concert hall, closed since a '95 massacre where cellists' bows snapped mid-performance. Flaying the front row, the hall's marquee reads, closed for renovations, but the doors swing open to a stage lit by candelabras of fused vertebrae. The air reeks of rosin and decay. Sheet music lines the walls, notes written in a glistening substance Serafina identifies as lymph fluid. Ezra's flashlight catches movement in the orchestra pit. A figure in a moth-eaten conductor's coat rises, face obscured by a mask of stretched eardrums. It gestures with a baton made from a human spine. The first violin stirs. Its strings are vocal cords. The cello's body is a rib cage. The conductor brings down the baton, and the orchestra plays a cacophony that liquefies Ezra's vision. The walls bleed pitch, the ceiling peeling away to reveal a black vortex where stars should be. Serafina vomits, her glasses cracked. Infrasound, she chokes, destabilizing our inner ears. We need to disrupt the frequency. Ezra fires his stolen bone flute into the conductor's chest. The mask ruptures, revealing Alden's decomposing face. The orchestra shrieks, instruments bursting into clouds of spores. As the vortex collapses, Serafina pockets a page from the conductor's score. Its title, scrawled in bile, churns her stomach, Symphony for the Unknitting of Skies. Chapter 5. The fractured cantata. Serafina's apartment is a grid of photographs, red string, and equations scrawled on steamed mirrors. The stolen score from the concert hall overlaps with the church fresco and catacomb map, forming a three-dimensional lattice of madness. She steps back, her reflection splintered across the glass. Patterns within patterns, she mutters, caffeine jitters making her hands flicker like moths. The score's title, Unknitting of Skies, aligns with a meteorological report from 1731, a hurricane that stalled over Morningvale for 13 days. It's eye-static, residents claiming it hummed. Ezra finds her at dawn, asleep on a stack of municipal death records. She's circled every third name in a 1578 ledger, plague survivors branded with the treble clef. "They're my ancestors," she says without opening her eyes. "I had the mark. Burned it off when I was 12. She rolls up her sleeve, revealing a keloid in the shape of a clef. "My mother said it was a birth defect." She lied. They track the surviving bloodlines to a crypt beneath the hospital's closed pediatrics wing. The air tastes like copper. Behind a false wall, they find a reliquary, a mummified hand clutching a peridot the size of a plum. Serafina's spectrometer flares. "Radioactive," she whispers. Its a resonator amplifies sound into gamma waves. Engraved on the gem, a lullaby fragment. "Sleep, sweet flesh, your marrow sings our name." The peridot thrums when Ezra hums. Serafina grabs his wrist. "Stop. It's crystallized bile from someone who died mid-scream." The stress fractures. She rotates the gem. Light bends through it, projecting sheet music onto the wall. The notes are gaps, negative space where stone meets air. "A counterpoint," she says. The silence between sounds. Whatever they're composing, it exists in omission. Testing the bile lullaby in her lab, Serafina drips it onto a petri dish of the fungal pathogen. The mycelium recoils, then blooms, digesting the gem's frequencies. "They're not just using resonance," she says. "They're feeding on it." This pathogen, her throat clicks. It might be older than Morningvale. A pre-human weapon. Ezra slips into the chief's office, hunting his confiscated gun. Instead, he finds the man's corpse slumped over his desk, eardrums burst, cerebral matter oozing from his nostrils. A suicide note scrawled in mucus. It's in the walls. In the water. "Forgive me." The chief's computer blinks with an unsent email, a decades-old cleanup order for the Floodgate 9 incident, classified by City Hall. Attached photos show workers in hazmat suits hosing silver sludge into the river. The walls hum. Ezra presses his palm to drywall. It ripples, releasing a cloud of spores. He flees as the chief's body convulses, fungal stalks erupting from his tear ducts, piping a familiar melody. Outside, Serafina waits in a stolen coroner's van. "City Hall's quarantined," she says. 12 people barricaded inside, singing in perfect harmony. Cops who went in, liquefied. They drive to the university's sub-basement archives, where Serafina's mentor, Dr. Voss's rival, studied thanatological harmonics. His files are gone, replaced by a wax cylinder labeled Chorus of the Threshold. Played backward, it's a duet between a human voice and something that chitters like rat teeth on glass. Serafina isolates the human vocalist. "That's me," she breathes. A recording from her grad school thesis defense, Midnight. They break into the closed radio tower, its transmitter still hot. Serafina jacks her laptop into the control board, tracing the pathogen's carrier wave. The signal originates from offshore coordinates matching 11 shipwrecks in a half-mile radius. "The Drowned Choir," she says. A fleet that sank in 1704 carrying an operatic troupe. Survivors claimed the ships kept singing as they went under. A thunderclap shakes the tower. The pathogen's frequency spikes, overloading the equipment. Serafina's laptop screen fractures into a fractal pattern. "It's here," she says flatly. "Decoding us." Ezra drags her outside as the tower's supports groan. They watch from the cliffs as the structure collapses into the sea, its debris scattering like sheet music. In the aftermath, Serafina discovers lesions on her ribs raised, spiraling ridges that throb in time with her heartbeat. "Resonance sclerae," she says, voice detached. "My tissue is crystallizing. The pathogen. It's harmonizing my biology." She presses a stethoscope to Ezra's chest. His heartbeat sinks to AG hashtag. "You're infected too," she says. "We've been instruments from the start." The chapter ends in a derelict lighthouse, its beam defunct. They trace the last coordinate from the radio signal, a rusted hatch leading to a flooded chamber. Floating in the briny dark are dozens of wax cylinders, each labeled with a date after today. Serafina opens the newest. A child's laugh skips into gibberish, then resolves into Ezra's voice. "You'll conduct the final movement. Wear your mother's face when you kill her." Chapter 6. The Dirge Protocol. The lighthouse chamber's water is gelid, laced with bioluminescent algae that clings to Ezra's skin like wet lace. He dives, flashlight cutting through the gloom to reveal a mosaic on the flooded floor. Human molars arranged in concentric circles, each engraved with a musical note. Serafina surfaces, coughing. It's a locking mechanism. The teeth, they're tuning keys. She submerges again, twisting molars like dials according to the cipher from the wax cylinder. The floor shudders, draining into a subaquatic tunnel lined with barnacle-crusted pipes. The passage opens into a grotto where stalactites drip a viscous hum. Submerged coffins float vertically, their lids ajar. Inside each floats a corpse lashed to a ship's mast fragment. Serafina examines one. The face is hers. "Resin effigies," she says, voice hollow. "Used in naval necromancy to mimic the dead." A wax cylinder in the corpse's mouth plays her voice. F-sharp attenuates the divide. "Cut along the dotted marrow." They surface in a cavern where the air vibrates with a submerged organ's drone. The walls are ribbed with fossilized coral, their ridges scored into sheet music. Serafina traces a clef. Not coral. Petrified mycelium. This is the source colony. Her fingers come away dusted with spores that squirm under her microscope. They're migrating, following a breeding song. Ezra's lesion pulses, mapping his ribs in jagged light. His reflection in a stagnant pool wavers aversion wearing his face, conducting an unseen orchestra. When he blinks, the vision persists. Serafina's breath fogs. The pathogen rewrites our biorhythms. We're becoming carriers, transmitters. She injects herself with a syringe of liquid nitrogen, freezing a lesion. It shrieks, emitting a high sea that cracks the pool's surface. Crawling through a fissure, they find a ship's hull encased in rock. The Vespera, 1704 passenger manifest lists an entire orchestra. The hold brims with instruments fused to skeletons. A violin's strings are spinal nerves. A trombonist's skeletal hand still grips their slide. Serafina photographs sheet music pinned under the captain's skull. Requiem for Archon's chord, scored for bone, brine, and breaking. At dusk, Ezra slips into fever. His heartbeat now a sustained vibrato. Dreams swarm, his mother humming the lullaby, her jaw unhinging to reveal fungal polyps. He wakes to Serafina force-feeding him a tincture of crushed peridot and antibiotics. "It's dampening the frequency," she says. The lesions dim. But the medicine comes with visions. He sees her dissection table piled with Ezra-shaped effigies, their chest cavities sprouting tuning forks. They return to Morningvale under a green-tinged moon. The streets throng with sleepwalkers, their mouths sutured with silver wire. Serafina scans the crowd. Resonance drones. They're harvesting ambient noise. She triangulates their paths. All lead to the abandoned observatory. Its dome, once shattered by a meteorite, now glows with bioluminescent fungi. Inside, the telescope's lens is replaced by the peridot resonator. The eyepiece reveals the colony in the grotto, magnified. Tendrils pulse in time to the city's power grid, a gun cocks. The Morta Maestro steps from the shadows, plague doctor mask cracked, skin veined with black mycelium. You've tuned the finale, it rasps, voice a chorus of Ezra's nightmares. It levels a bone flute at Seraphina, she's faster, jabbing a scalpel into its wrist. The maestro shrieks, disintegrating into a swarm of silver mites that spiral into the telescope. The lens focuses them into a beam, striking the colony. The grotto implodes on the peridot surface, alarms blare. The colony's collapse triggers a chain reaction, power grids fail. Water mains spew black sludge, and sleepwalkers collapse, their skulls birthing fungal stalks that play a dying chord. Seraphina checks the peridot. It's a relay. We just severed the maestro's tether. Not killed it. The observatory shakes, ceiling crumbling. Ezra drags her outside as the dome collapses, sealing the peridot under tons of debris, and the lab. Seraphina dissects a drone's silver sutures. Cadmium core. They were siphoning heavy metals, building a battery. She cross-references with Ezra's visions. The lullaby, the grotto, the ships hold all pieces of a resonance battery, designed to amplify the pathogen's final note. 1 decibel more, and the frequency shatters organic matter, she says. They're turning the city into a speaker. Ezra finds fresh lesions. His spit glows. Seraphina's hands tremble too badly to hold a pipette. We need to muffle the battery, she says. But the source isn't here. It's in the threshold where sound crosses into whatever's next. She plays the chorus of the threshold cylinder. The duet between woman and chittering void swells. Hidden in the static, coordinates to a cave beneath the city's oldest bridge, Midnight. They descend through a maintenance shaft into a catacomb choked with cenotaphs. The air reeks of burnt hair. A cenotaph labeled Maestro Unbound, 1578, splits, disgorging a mummified hand clutching a metronome. Its pendulum is a human femur. Seraphina winds it, the ticks sync with their lesions. A pacemaker, she whispers. It's keeping the threshold's heartbeat. The final tick cracks the floor, revealing a spiral staircase. From below, a familiar laugh echoes Lila Ray's, distorted by decades of decay. Chapter 7. The threshold tremolo, the staircase spirals into a void where gravity warps, ascending requires stepping downward. Bioluminescent lichen webs the walls, throbbing in time to the metronome's ticks. Ezra's lesions flare, his shadow fracturing into jagged silhouettes that mimic his movements, a half-second delayed. Seraphina counts steps aloud, her voice eroding as they descend. By step 444, her words disintegrate into static. Though her mouth still moves, the chamber below redefines darkness. Not absence of light, consumption of it, a viscous anti-glow. Lila Ray's laughter radiates from all directions, spliced with Seraphina's childhood lullabies. Ezra ignites a flare. The light contorts around a figure in a moth-eaten choir robe, Lila Ray's corpse, preserved by fungi, her eye sockets colonized by bioluminescent slugs. A fungal stalk sprouts from her throat, vibrating with recorded speech. You're late, my crescendo, it rasps. The threshold needs its conductors. Seraphina severs the stalk. Lila Ray's corpse convulses, vomiting a cataract of spores that coalesce into a hologram. Morningvale in 1578. Its streets thronged with plague masks. The maestro, alive, breathing, conducts a mass funeral pyre. The flames sing in D minor. As the sick burn, their ashes spiral into a vortex above the river. A voiceover in Seraphina's voice explains, sacrifices to sustain the threshold. The song pacifies what breaches. Ezra's flare dies. In the returning dark, his legions scribe hieroglyphs on the air. Seraphina deciphers them. Threshold Rule 1. Only the marked may pass. Her keloid scar sears, glowing green. Lila Ray's corpse stirs, slug eyes fixing on Seraphina. Blood tuning, it gurgles. Her line has always harmonized the fracture. They press deeper. The floor becomes a membrane, each step eliciting a wet timpani thud. Serafina's reflection in the goo reveals a doppelganger conducting an invisible orchestra. It's imprinting our resonance, she warns. Don't vocalize. Too late. Ezra coughs, his esophagus vibrating at 40 hertz. The membrane splits, disgorging thorned tendrils that wrap his ankles. Serafina stabs them with the metronome's femur pendulum. The tendrils recoil, hissing like steam on a cryogenic slab ahead. The threshold manifests as a floating grand piano made of calcified tears. Its keys are molar fragments. Above it hovers a black sphere no, a hole that devours sound. Serafina plays a C major chord. The sphere bloats, vomiting a strand of viscous silence that slithers toward them. Negative resonance, she gasps. It unmakes harmonics. Ezra's lesions metastasize. His ribs crack, reshaping into a ribcage harp. Serafina ties tourniquets made of piano wire. The pathogen's final stage, she mutters, injecting him with seawater from the Vespera's wreck. Salt might crystallize he screams. The lesions calcify, jutting from his skin like quartz shards. Lila Ray's corpse reappears, now fused to the piano bench. Her fingers spider across the keys, playing a reversed version of the dirge protocol. The sphere pulses, birthing a silhouette, the Mortem Maestro, reborn as a pitch-black cutout of itself. It points to Serafina's keloid. Tuning scar, it hisses. Your ancestry makes you the bridge. Break it, and the threshold ruptures. Serafina unsheathes a scalpel. Ezra grabs her wrist. No, he croaks, quartz-riddled lungs whistling. There's another way. He smashes the metronome on the piano. The femur pendulum snaps, releasing a fog of desiccated marrow. The maestro flickers. Serafina plays the aria of unraveling on Ezra's rib harp, its dissonance syncing with the fog. The threshold shudders. The sphere undulates, vomiting chunks of static that solidify into obsidian records. Serafina grabs one groove spell, lullaby of the last breath. The maestro's form destabilizes. You'll unmake more than me. It howls. Ezra collapses, his quartz spikes resonating with the aria. Blood vessels in his eyes burst, transforming vision into a phantasmagoria of musical notation. Serafina drags him toward an archway of fused clavicles. Beyond it, daylight, warped as if seen through old film. The maestro's final scream implodes the chamber. The piano twists inside out. The sphere contracts into a singularity that shreds Lila Ray's corpse into a chromatic scale of gore. The archway seals behind them. Serafina and Ezra emerge in the city cemetery, dawn filtering through cypress trees. Her keloid is numb. His quartz spikes crumble to dust. They sit a long moment, watching their breath fog in silence. Then, faint but unmistakable, a cello's mournful C-sharp drones from a fresh grave. Etched on its headstone, prelude to the 8th plague.